There exists a secret technique developed by Carl Jung that he never dared to share in his official publications. This wasn't because it lacked credibility or power, quite the opposite. Jung feared that if this method were to fall into the wrong hands, it could unravel both the world of psychology and religious belief as we know them. What he uncovered was a direct way to communicate with what he referred to as the ultimate source of consciousness. It went far beyond prayer, deeper than meditation, and unlike anything you've encountered in the spiritual realm. If you've ever sensed a greater force trying to reach out to you, if you've experienced moments when it felt like the universe was whispering secrets, or if you've encountered coincidences so precise they couldn't possibly be random, you've already touched the edge of what Jung's method made fully accessible. What we're exploring here isn't tied to any religion or mystical cult. It's a deeply structured psychological system that Jung refined over decades through private experimentation on himself. The results were so powerful that he questioned whether he had stumbled upon the actual language used by the divine to connect with humanity. Have you ever wondered why Carl Jung, one of the most influential minds in psychology, shifted his focus toward concepts like synchronicity, archetypes, and the collective unconscious, ideas that seemed to emerge from somewhere beyond the human intellect? These weren't the product of conventional scientific research. Jung claimed that these breakthroughs came through a profound, direct interaction with what he described as a higher intelligence. This wasn't just an abstract idea. He spoke of it as a real source of knowledge that could be accessed by bypassing the usual limits of conscious reasoning. In complete privacy, Jung practiced a unique approach designed to make contact with this source. He merged the principles of deep psychology with elements that mainstream science would likely label as irrational or even perilous. He pinpointed a very specific state of awareness, perched between being fully awake and drifting into sleep. It's a mental threshold, not dreaming, not fantasizing, not hallucinating, but something else entirely. He called it transcendent active imagination. In this state, the mind acts like a receiver, tuned into frequencies of insight that are typically beyond our grasp. Using this method, Jung believed he could pose direct questions to what he considered the fountain of wisdom. The answers he received were often so detailed and insightful that he was convinced they couldn't have come from his ordinary conscious self. Over time, this source didn't just answer his queries. It began guiding him, unveiling discoveries and ideas that reshaped how he viewed not only psychology, but the nature of reality itself. Think back to times in your life when a powerful intuition struck you, something you just knew without evidence, yet it turned out to be completely accurate. Or moments when it felt like an invisible hand was nudging you toward a crucial realization or decision. According to Jung, these aren't flukes. They're flashes of a larger communication system we've never been taught to recognize. Jung believed that these intuitive moments were not anomalies or tricks of the brain, but brief openings into a form of dialogue that is always ongoing, though typically blocked from our awareness. His forbidden method aimed to transform these sporadic moments into a continuous, conscious communication with that deeper intelligence. The first step in Jung's technique was something he referred to as clearing the conscious mind. But don't confuse this with traditional meditation. It wasn't about stilling the mind or focusing on the breath. Instead, it was a method of dismantling the internal psychological defenses that prevent deeper perception. Jung came to understand that our conscious minds act like gatekeepers, constantly filtering out vast streams of information that don't fit within the rigid framework of our education and beliefs. Through his method, Jung found a way to momentarily silence this inner gatekeeper. Once this happened, he discovered that his mind became open to input from levels of consciousness that were far beyond his individual ego. This wasn't vague spiritual sentiment. It was a specific psychological process that he rigorously explored. And it began with something he called dialogue with the shadow. Now, in his published work, Jung often referred to the shadow as the hidden or suppressed parts of our psyche. But in his secret practice, he took it much further. He treated the shadow not just as a set of traits, but as an actual presence, an autonomous entity with which one could communicate. This conversation was not symbolic or imagined. He experienced it as real, vivid, and interactive. Jung argued that our shadow, left unacknowledged, acts as static, disrupting our ability to tune into higher sources of wisdom. Only when we confront and integrate this shadow can we clear the path for more refined forms of communication. This integration wasn't passive. It required real engagement. He literally spoke to these parts of himself and received responses. Through this process, Jung cleared away the inner noise that had long interfered with divine contact. After doing this work, Jung began to experience encounters with what he described as archetypal beings, figures that felt fully real, with knowledge and personalities distinct from his own. One such figure was a wise old man he named Philemon. Jung said Philemon often gave him advice and shared ideas that felt far beyond anything he could have come up with consciously. Another was Salome, a representation of the feminine psyche whose insights changed the way he understood the nature of being. These weren't hallucinations or daydreams. Jung insisted that these figures existed independently of his conscious mind and engaged with him in ways that consistently surprised him. What truly alarmed Jung was that these entities appeared to be only the beginning. He suspected there was a vast hierarchy of intelligence beyond our awareness, waiting to be accessed. As Jung continued to refine and use his method, he began receiving what he described as messages from the voices of the collective unconscious and intelligence so vast that it seemed to contain the memory of all human experience, past, present, and even future. He noted that he would often gain insights about ancient civilizations or psychological mechanisms that were only validated by scientific or archaeological findings years, even decades later. The most astonishing part? Jung claimed he had even tapped into what he referred to as the mind of God. In his private journals, which were published only long after his death, he revealed that he had used his technique to ask precise questions about the universe, the meaning of life, and the structure of reality itself. And the responses he recorded were not vague impressions. They were coherent, detailed answers that reshaped his understanding of human existence. He claimed to have received insights into the nature of consciousness that foreshadowed modern discoveries in quantum physics. He foresaw patterns in human behavior and societal change that could only be described as prophetic. And yet, Jung emphasized that this wasn't magic. It was a disciplined, repeatable practice of entering what he called a state of complete receptivity. This state wasn't about trying to see visions or hear voices. It required the suspension of judgment, the silencing of analytical thought, and the surrendering of control. In this condition, information didn't come through words or images. It came through a sensation of absolute knowing. He described it as a truth that revealed itself in your core, bypassing logic entirely and registering as undeniable certainty. Jung also employed what he called sacred automatic writing. He would allow his hand to write without conscious control, capturing messages and knowledge that often left him stunned. These writings delved into theology, human purpose, and metaphysics with a clarity and depth that, in his words, far exceeded his intellectual capabilities. He swore these insights had never crossed his mind before appearing on paper. As he grew more fluent in this form of communion, Jung noticed his entire life beginning to align in ways that felt orchestrated. Strange coincidences became normal. Books fell into his hands at just the right time. Strangers delivered messages he'd silently been contemplating. And breakthroughs in his therapy sessions seemed guided by something greater than himself. These synchronicities weren't mere chance. Jung saw them as confirmation that he had tapped into a guiding intelligence that not only answered questions but actively shaped his reality. He began using this technique before meeting with patients, often receiving precise information about what each individual truly needed, insights that amazed both him and the patients with their clarity and timing. Jung gradually came to see his role not just as a psychologist, but as a conduit for this higher intelligence. He stopped viewing therapy as a process of applying theory and instead saw it as an opportunity to deliver messages from the source, messages uniquely tailored for each person's healing and growth. His goal shifted from treatment to transmission. But what unsettled him the most was the realization that this intelligence seemed to have its own purpose, one deeply tied to the evolution of human consciousness. Jung didn't just feel guided, he felt chosen. He came to believe that many of his groundbreaking ideas, such as the collective unconscious, synchronicity, and archetypes, weren't his creations. They were revelations he had been entrusted to share, destined to be planted in the soil of humanity's collective mind. He saw himself as part of a larger mission to prepare human beings for a new stage of awareness. Through his secret practice, he uncovered visions not just of individual insight, but of a future where people would no longer rely on external institutions, religious or scientific, for ultimate guidance. Instead, they would learn to access the source within themselves. Jung's method, he discovered, could also provide glimpses into the future, not as vague fortune-telling, but as clear insights into the potential outcomes of current decisions. This source, he believed, had a vantage point outside of time, offering him a perspective that human cognition simply couldn't reach. With it, he could recognize patterns invisible to the logical mind, ripples of future consequence born from present choices. He didn't just use this knowledge to guide himself, he shared it with others, offering advice rooted not in guesswork or theory, but in what he considered divine clarity. But this, too, is why he kept his method hidden. Jung feared that if this power were made public, it would be exploited, twisted by people hungry for power, or diluted by dogmatic institutions. He felt that only individuals with a mature, grounded psyche could wield such a tool safely. And so, instead of releasing his full method, he left breadcrumbs, coded instructions buried in his writings on active imagination, subtle clues hidden within his discussions of archetypes and synchronicity. He knew that only those who were truly ready would recognize and understand the path. To Jung, humanity wasn't ready for direct divine dialogue. Not yet. But he hoped that one day we would be, and that those with the eyes to see and ears to hear would rise to carry the method forward. Through years of solitary experimentation, Jung realized that divine communication wasn't a privilege reserved for a few enlightened beings. It was an innate capacity, hardwired into every human being. The only requirement was the willingness to remove the psychological barriers that kept us from accessing it. In this, Jung wasn't promoting mysticism. He was revealing the deepest truth about the human condition, that each of us carries within a direct link to infinite wisdom. He came to understand that what people commonly refer to as God isn't a distant being in the heavens, but the most intimate layer of our own consciousness, the voice beneath the noise, the knowing beneath the questions. We've been searching outward for what has always been inside. The state of complete receptivity, as Jung described it, demands radical humility. You have to let go of control, of needing to figure it out, and instead surrender to a level of awareness that doesn't use logic or language. In this state, knowledge emerges not in thoughts, but as instantaneous understanding. It's not something you hear or see, it's something you become aware of, as if remembering something your soul has always known. To enhance this state, Jung relied on sacred automatic writing. He'd sit, open to the experience, and allow his hand to move freely across the page. What emerged were writings he didn't recognize as his own. These weren't fragmented musings, but structured revelations about the nature of life, consciousness, and the human journey. The level of complexity and insight in these messages convinced him they originated from a source far beyond his intellectual mind. And the more he followed this guidance, the more his life unfolded in surreal harmony. It was as though the universe responded to his inner alignment, placing him in precisely the right places, among the right people, at the right times. The coincidences became too accurate, too meaningful to ignore. Books he hadn't looked for would land in his lap with answers to the very questions he'd been asking. People would appear who unknowingly delivered exactly what he needed to hear. Through this method, Jung no longer just helped himself, he became a vessel for helping others. His therapy sessions became less about psychological analysis and more about delivering the precise insight that each individual soul needed. He understood that healing wasn't about fixing someone from the outside, but reconnecting them with the internal source they'd forgotten. But with this revelation came a sobering truth. Jung realized that this source, this intelligence beyond the individual self, wasn't neutral. It had intention. It wasn't just answering questions. It was calling certain individuals to serve a larger purpose. He felt he had been chosen not to keep this discovery to himself, but to act as a bridge between ordinary human awareness and a greater divine intelligence. His ideas weren't accidents. They were seeds meant to awaken something dormant in humanity. Jung foresaw a time when more people would begin to hear this inner voice clearly, bypassing outdated institutions and reclaiming their inner authority. The era of gurus, dogmas, and external salvation would give way to a new phase in human evolution, one where each individual accesses wisdom directly from the source within. And now, perhaps, that time has come. If you're listening to these words and feel a strange resonance, an inner pull, it may not be coincidence. Jung believed that those drawn to this knowledge were being invited into something deeper, a journey toward discovering their own ability to receive divine guidance. The only question left is, are you willing to silence the noise, face your shadow, and enter that sacred space of receptivity where the voice of truth has always been waiting? If this message stirred something in you, don't let it fade. Like, share, and subscribe to our channel because together, we're rediscovering a forgotten language of wisdom, and your journey is just beginning.